How you going, folks? You're very welcome along to this week's episode of John's Garage. This week, folks, I'm doing something different. Okay, we're going to take a look at the life of someone I hugely admired growing up, and still do admire to this day. Really know what they've achieved, and we're going to talk a lot about their life, a lot about one of their crowning glories, and a lot of just different interesting things which happened to them along the way and where they've ended up now. Okay, so this all came about one evening. My wife was watching TV and I was just bored off my head, and I just said, you know what, I gotta remember those brilliant days of motorsport during the 90s, and said, here, let's just start down this little rabbit hole. But anyway, this week, folks, we're going to take a look at the life of Edmund Patrick Jordan. Flash Gordon to his friends growing up, and Eddie Jordan to you and me now. And of course, central to all of this is going to be the story of Jordan F1. Now, just to warn you, as I'm speaking, okay, the chair I'm sitting in, like myself, is getting a little bit rattly and a little bit squeaky. So if you hear a creak or a squeak in the background, that's all it is. Just ignore it, okay? Anyway, let's get on with it. Eddie Jordan was born on March 30th, 1948 in Dublin to his parents Eileen and Paddy Jordan. He's one sister, her name's Helen, and he grew up in Dartry and Bray. His early life was unremarkable. He started his schooling in Milltown before later attending the Sing Street Christian Brothers School, where he was encouraged through various different means to study very, very hard. Now, during his time there, he briefly considered becoming a priest, and at 15, but as fate would have it, he was destined for huge adventures in his life, which he's still going through to this day, thank God. So, greater things for Eddie early in his life arrived in the form of getting a job in Bank of Ireland in Mullingar. So he started off as a bank clerk there before moving to a branch in Camden Street back inside in Dublin. So exciting stuff indeed back in the 1970s. Anyway, in 1970, during a banking strike in Dublin, Eddie relocated to a very small island off the coast of France called Jersey, and here he worked as an accountant and a barman. This, however, is where fate would intervene for Eddie, and indeed for Irish motorsport. Eddie encountered kart racing here for the first time in the island of Jersey. And when he returned to Ireland later that summer, with a taste for racing, Eddie purchased a kart and began racing, and he won the 1971 Irish Kart Championship. Now he had a taste for racing, speed, and winning, so he had all three in that mouth of his. In 1974, Eddie decided he'd outgrown karting and moved to Formula Ford and entered the Irish Formula Ford Championship, and again moved in 1975 to Formula 3. Sadly for Eddie, he was forced to sit out the 1976 championship after suffering serious leg injuries in a crash at Mallory Park. However, he returned to racing in 1977, and here he took 3 victories with a switch to Formula Atlantic. He won the overall Irish Atlantic Championship in 1978 also. 79 proved to be a busy year with Eddie racing under the team name Team Ireland, and he raced in a Formula 2 race, and notably here, he had his first taste of Formula 1 when he got to test drive for McLaren. Sadly, it wasn't to be for Eddie, and in 1979, Eddie then founded his own racing team called Eddie Jordan Racing, which went on to good success between 1981 and 1987. So the 80s proved to be a good time for Eddie Jordan Racing. And in 1978, such was their success, they moved into Formula 3000, with their first wins coming in 1988. The team went on to dominate the championship in 1989 also. By this time, Eddie had given racing breaks to some notable drivers, including Martin Brundle, Johnny Herbert, and Jean Lacey. More breaks were yet to come, but first Eddie had to launch his F1 team. During the 1980s, Eddie had one overriding goal which he was working towards, but which he was never yet to realise, and that was to launch his own Formula 1 racing team. After a failed attempt to purchase the failing Lotus F1 team in the late 1980s, in an attempt to replicate the success Ron Dennis had with McLaren, Eddie knew he had only one realistic option remaining. And so it was, during the winter of 1989 into 1990, Eddie invested all his personal money into the creation of his own F1 team. Now, this led to cutbacks in his Formula 3000 team operations in 1990, with only 3 cars run using very unknown drivers, new and unknown drivers, I suppose, such as Eddie Irvine and Heinz-Harald Frentzen. Eddie Irvine was the most successful, finishing the season in 3rd place overall. We're going to meet those guys again later in this story, so buckle up. Eddie Jordan's new F1 team was to be named Jordan F1, but it was far from ready to race in 1990. Working with a tiny budget, Eddie first focused on getting a car. And to achieve this, Gary Anderson, Andrew Green, and Mark Smith were employed to design a new F1 car for the team. Eddie Jordan had successfully attracted big name sponsors to his Formula 3000 team, not by printing glossy brochures which talked about what they were going to do, but by developing a real car which could be shown to the potential sponsor already with their logo on it. And he pulled off this trick amazingly with his Formula 3000 team with Camel. Camel weren't fully committed to sponsoring the team. So what Eddie did was Eddie got the car designed, built, painted up with the Camel logo, and then got press photographers to picture it and put it on the front cover of magazines, and basically pressurized Camel into sponsoring the team. And it worked very successfully. And that was also part of his plan for buying out the Lotus F1 team, who Camel were actually sponsoring at the time. But it didn't come to fruition. But anyway, we won't worry about that. And so it was that by October 1990, the Cosworth-powered 911 was ready for testing and attracting sponsors. Now, the 911 model name, as you can expect, raised a few eyebrows of Porsche, who initially sent a letter in German to Jordan F1, demanding they change it. And Eddie, being Eddie, ignored it. It wasn't in English. I couldn't care less what they're going to say, so we just ignored it. Now, realising Porsche AG realised that there was a bit of a language barrier, and of course that they were being ignored, so they decided to write again in English. Now, rather than ignore the second letter, Eddie arranged a meeting with Porsche UK and their gang of lawyers to explain that it was much too late to change the name, as the season was about to start and it would force him to rebrand the entire company, and he simply didn't have the money to do that. Being a wise old head, Eddie left Porsche UK's office in a newly provided Porsche 911 and promptly changed the car model name of his racing team to 191. It hadn't cost him a single cent, but it got him some brilliant publicity. And of course, a brand new car from Porsche to show there was no ill will. Jordan F1 started their first season with Bernard Gachot and Andrew de Cesaris. Jordan F1 started their first season with Bertrand Gachot and Andrea de Cesari behind the wheel, but after Bertrand was in prison later in the season for an earlier assault, Eddie had to seek out another driver. So he settled on a new driver who had impressed him in the lower leagues, a little-known driver called Michael Schumacher. Now, Michael only stayed with Jordan F1 for one race before being really promptly snapped up by Benetton, who saw the potential he had. Anyway, Jordan's F1's first season had been a huge success. They demonstrated in their green Irish Tour Sport and 7-Up sponsored car that they were truly a force to be reckoned with by finishing 5th in the Constructors' Championship. No mean feat for your first season. The first ever Irish F1 team, and only ever up to now, finished with 13 points and 5th overall out of 18 teams. And they had 2 4th-place finishes during the season in Mexico and Canada. If this seemed too good to be true, it was. Behind the scenes, Eddie's decision to use all of his personal wealth was creating huge difficulties. Eddie had blown the team budget by millions. By all accounts, the team budget was supposed to be £7.5 million, and Eddie had spent £11 million. And now the banks were looking to be paid. Fortunately for Eddie, a certain racing driver by the name of Ayrton Senna happened to recommend a South African oil company called Sasol, who were looking to sponsor a team to avail of some tax breaks back in South Africa. Jordan F1 quickly took the deal, and yet again Lady Luck smiled on Eddie, but it wasn't all going to go his way. The 1992 season was a disaster for Jordan F1. Jordan moved from a Cosworth engine to a Yamaha V12, which turned out to be a huge mistake. Jordan F1 ended the 1992 season with just 1 point. 1993 proved to be a better year for Eddie and Jordan F1. The troublesome Yamaha V12 was dumped in favour of a Hart V10. With an improved chassis, engine and drivers, Jordan began to rebuild as a team. Again, Eddie opted for newer, unknown drivers to save money. This time it was in the form of an upstart by the name of Rubens Barrichello and a certain Northern Irish racing driver by the name of Eddie Irvine behind the wheel. 1994 cemented Jordan F1 as a serious team. Again, they improved greatly, Rubens got his first podium finish, and Jordan F1 obviously also finished first. However, Irvine received a two-race ban after an incident at Interlagos circuit. He returned finishing the points for the following race, but Jordan F1 wasn't finished with success in 1994 just yet. Rubens gave the team their first podium start after a blistering lap in Spa. And by the end of the season, Jordan F1 had scored 28 points and finished in fifth place overall. A huge achievement for such a small team. 1995 saw a new engine and sponsorship deal being struck with Peugeot and Total. Success also followed with a second and third place at the Canadian Grand Prix. However, overall, the team failed to build on its achievements in previous years. 1996 was a notable year for Jordan F1. Eddie Irvine left the team to race with Ferrari, and Martin Brundle joined the team. Again, the team finished fifth overall after a number of strong fourth-place finishes across the season, and it was notable for another reason too. It was the first year Jordan F1 adopted their striking yellow team colour. In 1997, this yellow livery became even more attractive with the adoption of some nose art for the car in the form of the snake mascot called Hissing Sid. It also went on in other years to have not just Hissing Sid, but also Buzzing Hornets and so on and so forth. It was also the year Jackie Stewart launched his own F1 team, Stewart Grand Prix. The impact of this for Jordan F1 is that they lost Rubens Barrichello, while Martin Brundle hung up his racing gloves to become a commentator for ITV. Jordan replaced them with Juan Carlo Fisichella from Minardi and a certain German chap by the name of Ralf Schumacher. This year was noticeable also for a number of reasons, not least Ralph's propensity in early races to park his car in a barrier, gravel trap, or even worse, his own teammate. Overall, the season was good, however, with the team again finishing in fifth position overall in the Constructors' Championship. 1998 was the year Jordan dumped Peugeot engines in favour of Mugen-honda. What appeared to be a smart deal at first didn't maybe live up to that. The first half of the season was sadly marked with reliability issues, however, things did improve. 1998 also saw Eddie hiring a driver he had given a break to previously. This time, this driver was returning as a world champion. Damon Hill came to Jordan F1 and rewarded the team with their first victory. This was made even better by the fact Ralph finished second. Or was it made even better by this fact? So you see, this victory was a massive own goal for Eddie, as he had ordered Ralph not to overtake Damon Hill to take the win. Ralph was actually driving faster than Damon and was probably going to overtake him pretty quickly if he hadn't have gotten that order. Now, this angered Ralph's older brother Michael so much so that he bought out the remainder of Ralph's contract with Jordan. So no doubt a major loss to the team. Be that as it may, Jordan F1 finished the season in fourth place after a last corner overtake by Damon Hill and Heinz-Harald Frentzen, who had just so happened to confirm a move to Jordan F1. So I'll let you decide if that was accidental or not. Anyway, Heinz-Harald Frentzen had a disastrous year that year, and I think maybe was accused of giving his own team the two fingers by letting Jordan F1 overtake them on that last turn. But anyway, we'll let you decide what happened there. 1999 was to be the team's best performance. With Frentzen earning 2 wins and a pole position, it briefly looked like he was competing for the World Championship, but Ferrari and McLaren quickly ended any prospects of that. Still, Frentzen finished third overall in the Drivers' Championship, and Jordan F1 finished third in the Constructors' Championship. Eddie was on a high and could see the fruits of all his work, ambition, and risk-taking coming together into an F1 team that was now competing at the top. And sadly, as we rolled into the 2000s, it wasn't to be. 2000 and 2001 seasons were highlighted by bad luck, bad engines, driver changes, and disputes within the team. And that caused them to slip to 5th place and 6th place in the Constructors' Championships, respectively. 2003 was a very difficult season for Eddie and the team also. The car was proven to be lacklustre in both the engine and chassis departments, and also sheer bad luck played a part. After a massive rainstorm led to a massive crash during the Brazilian Grand Prix, Jordan was initially deemed to have finished second. However, a week later, this was upgraded to a win. But this was one of the few points opportunities of the season. The team finished just ahead of Minardi in 9th place. And sadly, things didn't improve much for the final season in 2004. Struggling for points, sponsors, and an engine supplier, and of course cash, Eddie Jordan knew that the writing was on the wall. Despite a very late engine deal with Toyota for the 2005 season, the team was sold to Midland F1. According to accounts at the time, after signing the deal in Ian Phillips' office, Eddie just sat there in tears and was unconsolable. And who would blame him? His dream and his life's achievements were now gone. The team raced as Jordan F1 in 2005 but rebranded as Midland F1 Racing in 2006. And Jordan F1 unfortunately faded into the mists of time. Now, before we move on, it is worth noting what became of Jordan F1 and what it is today. So it actually, I suppose its spirit has lived on. In 2006, it was rebranded as Midland F1. It was then sold and in 2007 was branded Spiker F1. In 2008, it was sold again to become Force India and it remained Force India for about 10 years. In 2018, it was again sold and became Racing Point F1. And in 2021, it became Aston Martin F1. And Aston Martin F1 still uses Jordan F1's own head office, and it's its own head office now. So it's the head office of Aston Martin. So to summarise, Eddie Jordan went from humble beginnings to the top of one of the most glamorous sports in the world. He risked it all several times over, put his money where his mouth is, and in his own words, Jordan F1 had won 5 times throughout the team's existence. 4 times it won on the track, and once it won in managing to survive. So Eddie hasn't dropped into a life of total obscurity, however, yet. He has been an F1 pundit for the BBC, a writer, a Top Gear presenter in 2016, and again in 2016, he became an F1 commentator on ITV. He's also hosted numerous TV shows and has written many articles. But there's more to Eddie than this. He's also a keen sailor, patron of Irish arts, shareholder in Celtic Football Club, property developer, Christ who isn't in Ireland, and many other things. And my favourite, of course, is that he's a keen musician with his own band, who are called the V10s. Eddie plays the drums in that band. If you want to search them out on YouTube, just search the V10s. And for now, that's where the story ends. So listen, folks, it's been a bit of a long one. It's been a different one. Thank you very much for joining me. And listen, I hope to see you soon back in John's Garage. We'll talk to you all again. See you later, folks. Bye-bye.